Welcome to another edition of the Firehouse. I am your host, the NFL Exporter, and we are live on Blaze1Radio. It is time for Thursday night football once again. But before we get into today's show, as always, let's make sure you know where to find us on our social networks. For myself, the NFL Exporter, you can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter at NFL Exporter. You can also go to youtube.com, click on channels. In the search engine, put NFL Exporter. That is spelled NFLExporter. That applies to Facebook and Twitter as well. You can also listen to past shows of the Firehouse here on Blaze1Radio. Go to youtube.com, in the search engine, put the Firehouse with NFL Exporter on Blaze1Radio. To connect with Blaze1Radio, hook up with us on Twitter at Blaze1Media, and on Facebook, that's Blaze1 Media. My man Gordon Mills, that's the name that you will find underneath that. To call into the show, the number is 716-249-0552. The email address, if you choose to go that route, is NFLExporter@yahoo.com. Just leave your name, your city and state, your favorite football team. And if you have questions, you want to comment, have some questions, or need some advice for fantasy football, or you just want to chop it up about football, please call in or use the email. We're going to get things started today by talking some fantasy football. And what an interesting first 3 weeks it has been, as we've seen a lot of the top rated players who were taken in the first 3 rounds underachieving, while it has been the players in the latter rounds and players who came into the season without the big names who have been very productive in putting up the big fantasy football points. Now, it's a very long season in the NFL. We're talking 16 games. So if you include the games this week, there are still 13 games left. But if you're a fantasy football owner, your season is only 13 or 14 weeks long. And if you have some of these players who haven't been producing for you, you're starting to get a little bit worried, because usually in fantasy football, when you do draft these players, I'm talking about your superstars, your Calvin Johnsons, your Peyton Mannings, your Drew Breeses, your Demaryius Thomas, your Jimmy Grahams, you certainly expect for these players to come out and perform 75% of the time. Look, all of these guys are human. Everybody can have an off week, and especially if you're at a skill position, at the wide receiver, the running back, or the tight end, certainly defenses can put game plans together to eliminate you from a game for a week and let the other players on the team beat you. Certainly guys, again, like Calvin Johnson, Jimmy Graham, teams, I've seen teams triple coverage, put 3 men on Calvin Johnson, wide receiver for the Detroit Lions. You know for a fact, after scoring 16 touchdowns last year, the team's number one option is to stop tight end Jimmy Graham for the New Orleans Saints. And so you certainly take that into consideration. Me, myself, the league that I'm in, it's 13 games. And so the way that I look at it is there's probably going to be 3 to 4 games where these players don't put up the big fantasy football numbers. And again, that's completely understandable. But in those other 9 to 10 games, I'm relying heavily on these guys to put up the big numbers to lead my team. And so for some of these players that we're going to discuss, really a lot of them coming out and having 3 straight weeks of bad performances, these guys almost have to have 9 or 10 straight weeks of being productive, or they're going to end up being a big time waste for your team, especially if you took these guys in the first 3 rounds of your fantasy football drafts. Now, before we go ahead and look at the players who are not doing well, let's certainly give praise and give it up for the players who are performing at a high level. We're going to look at the top 5 players from each position who scored the most points in fantasy football for week 3 around the NFL. The number one player for fantasy football overall last week was Andrew Luck, the quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts. Had a career day, completing 31 out of 39 passes for 370 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no interceptions. That was good for 31 points. You had Kirk Cousins, the quarterback for the Washington Redskins, in his first start, put up 427 yards, 3 TDs, 1 interception. That was good for 27 points. You had Nick Foles, the quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, throw for 325 yards, 3 TDs. He put up 26 points. You had Matt Ryan, quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons, throw for 286 yards and 3 TDs. That was good for 23 points. And then we had 2 players tied at 21. Russell Wilson, quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks, and Austin Davis, the third-string quarterback for the St. Louis Rams. Coming in at the running back position, leading the way for the second time in 3 weeks, was Marshawn Lynch of the Seattle Seahawks. He had 24 points. Rashard Jennings, running back for the New York Giants, had 23. Joe McKnight of the Kansas City Chiefs had 18. We had 3 players tied with 17 points, that being LeGarrette Blount of the Pittsburgh Steelers, DeMarco Murray of the Dallas Cowboys, and Niles Davis, the backup running back for the Kansas City Chiefs. And then we had 2 players tied at 16 points, that being Fred Jackson of the Buffalo Bills and Giovanni Bernard of the Cincinnati Bengals. Topping the wide receiver charts was Julio Jones, who put on a show last week right here on Thursday Night Football of the Atlanta Falcons. Came out with 9 catches, 161 yards, 2 touchdown receptions. That was good for 28 points. We had Jeremy Maclin of the Philadelphia Eagles and Antonio Brown of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Both have 21 points. It was Pierre Garçon of the Washington Redskins, Deshaun Jackson of the Washington Redskins, rookie Kelvin Benjamin of the Carolina Panthers, John Brown for the Arizona Cardinals, and Jordan Matthews of the Philadelphia Eagles. All of those players totaled 19 points. And then rounding out our top 5, we had Devin Hester of the Atlanta Falcons with 17, and Eddie Royal of the San Diego Chargers, as well as Victor Cruz of the New York Giants. Both had 16. Topping the charts for our tight ends, it was Martellus Bennett of the Chicago Bears with 17 points. We had 5 players tied with 12 points, that being Greg Olsen of the Carolina Panthers, Rob Gronkowski of the New England Patriots. You had Coby Fleener and Dwayne Allen of the Indianapolis Colts, both with 12 points. You had Andrew Corliss with 12, and also John Hill of the New Orleans Saints. And Hill actually had 10 points. You had Travis Kelce, tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs, with 9. And then we had 3 players tied with 8. Daniel Fells of the New York Giants, Jacob Tamme of the Denver Broncos, and Lance Kendricks of the St. Louis Rams. The top defense for fantasy football last week was the Atlanta Falcons. Again, we had an opportunity to see them last Thursday night right here in Atlanta, where they put a big-time beat down on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 56-14. Their defense and special teams had 28 points. The Detroit Lions and Indianapolis Colts both had 17. The Pittsburgh Steelers had 13. Chicago Bears had 12. And the Cincinnati Bengals defense continues to dominate. They had 11 points. Rounding out our top performers for fantasy football is our kickers. And the number 1 kicker last week was Adam Vinatieri of the Indianapolis Colts with 16. You had Sean Swisham of the Pittsburgh Steelers. You had Nick Folk of the New York Jets. And you also had Cody Parker of the Philadelphia Eagles, all with 15 points. And then you had Chandler Cardinzano. He's a rookie for the Arizona Cardinals, has not missed a kick all year. He had 13 points. And then Josh Brown of the New York Giants had 12. And so all of those guys that I just mentioned are not only playing well just that 1 week, but all of those guys have definitely been putting in the work for the entire season. Now, obviously, the defense special teams is not a actual skill position player. So those defenses switch from week to week. The kickers as well, but definitely the quarterbacks, the running backs, the wide receivers, and the tight ends that we mentioned all have been playing very, very well this season. Now let's go ahead and talk about the players who have been struggling so far in fantasy football. And again, as I mentioned, if you pick these players in the first 2 or 3 rounds, you were certainly depending on them to carry your ball club and put in the major points for your team every week. While the players that you drafted in rounds 4 and thereafter, you certainly wanted these guys to produce, but you weren't going to be leaning on them and expecting them to put up the big points like the players in the first 3 rounds. Now, what I have in front of me here is a live draft that I actually did and participated in. And so taking a look at the first round, obviously Adrian Peterson of the Minnesota Vikings has been a big time disappointment. Now, he has not been on the football field due to off the field issues. You know that right now he's going through court and legal situations regarding being alleged or accused of child abuse to his 4-year-old son. Nonetheless, he's only played in 1 game this season. Peterson was taken in the top 2 or 3 picks in most fantasy and the majority of fantasy football leagues. And so with him only playing 1 game this season, and in that game only having 7 points, he's been a big time disappointment. There is no timetable for him to return this season, and so you can't let a superstar like that go. But he is sitting on everybody's roster who has him, mine included, on the bench, just hoping that he can return sometime soon. Jamal Charles, running back for the Kansas City Chiefs, led the NFL in total touchdowns last year. He had a poor performance in week 1, was injured in week 2. In the very first quarter, and so he has just 2 points this year. Obviously, that is a big-time disappointment. You're talking about running back Eddie Lacy, another guy who was taken in the first round in every single fantasy football draft. He has only had a high of 4 points this season. And so, man, that is a huge concern. I think out of the players that I mentioned, when Peterson, if he comes back to the field, is going to be productive. I have no doubt that Jamal Charles, once he's back healthy, he's going to do his thing. But Eddie Lacy, being in his second year, a lot of times, what it is. It's a sophomore slump. Now the teams are really prepared and ready for him. Along with that, Green Bay Packers offensive line not playing at a high level, it has resulted in him performing very poorly. He has a good matchup on his hands this week against the Chicago Bears. If he does not get his act together, I think that his owners are certainly going to really start questioning what they should do with him and if they should keep him on their lineup. Looking at the second round, Aaron Rodgers has certainly underachieved so far this season. I seen a column today on ESPN saying to give Aaron Rodgers a break. I'm not buying it at all. This guy is an elite quarterback. Many consider him the best quarterback in the NFL due to his skill set. He's always rated in the top 10 players in the NFL overall. Now, I do know that Green Bay certainly has not addressed their offensive line issues, but nonetheless, there's no excuse for Aaron Rodgers playing as poorly as he has. I would not worry about him, though, looking at how easy, or I should say, the defenses that Green Bay is going to face coming up. I'm pretty confident that his numbers are going to begin to add up over the next couple weeks here. Another guy who has not performed at a high level has been Doug Martin. He's battled injuries as well. I only gave you 1 point this season. He was injured the very first game of the season. Has not returned to the field since. Right now, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers team as a whole is struggling. And so I'm not too sure what to expect from him. I had him rated 23rd on my running back rankings. As I seen him emerging and it looked like that offense was getting on track, I had him in my top 10 by the time fantasy drafts took place. But right now, it is not looking too promising for him. I know his owners are praying that he can turn things around. C.J. Spiller is another guy who there's a lot of question marks about. He doesn't get the goal line carries. He is not in the game when the Bills go to pass the football, so that certainly was a little bit of a knock on his value coming in the drafts. Nonetheless, outside of a 102-yard touchdown return on a kickoff, he's been relatively quiet. I know he's a guy, myself included, who thought when healthy could certainly give you a lot of fantasy value, but through 3 weeks, he's been very quiet, only scoring one touchdown on the offensive side of the football. This is the round here where you see a lot of guys underachieving. We're over in the fourth round. You have Vincent Jackson of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers has done absolutely nothing. If it wasn't for a touchdown catch last week in Atlanta, and that was only 15 yards, which gave him 7 for the week, he pretty much would have had a horrible season up to this point. Again, that Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense and team as a whole right now is just struggling, so I've got a lot of concern about Vincent Jackson. Keenan Allen, the wide receiver for the San Diego Chargers, another guy who could be faced with the sophomore slump. Had over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns as a rookie. This year has been battling a hamstring injury and just has not been able to get it done. His high for the year is just 5 points in one game. Frank Gore is another guy who's been a big letdown. The 49ers are opting to pass the football a lot more, which is very unusual. That certainly took a hit on his production. Last week at Arizona, he's a starting running back in the NFL. This guy only had 6 carries for 10 yards. So that's certainly something that you wouldn't expect. And then a couple wide receivers. We're talking about Andre Johnson of the Houston Texans. He did start off strong with 93 yards in the first game of the season, but since then has not scored more than 4 points in a game. And then Larry Fitzgerald, the future Hall of Famer for the Arizona Cardinals. This guy has not scored more than 5 points in the season. And so this is a make or break week for fantasy football players. Guys have not been performing, and as I mentioned, I usually give players 4 games not to put up numbers. With those players I mentioned, they're already at 3. And so they've got to come out and show us something this week. A couple other names who were taken in the 5th round. Chris Johnson of the Jets. This guy has done nothing. If it wasn't for a receiving touchdown in the first week, his numbers would look horrible. Percy Harvin has yet to really do his thing in the game. Really got away with one in their second week game against the Chargers as he stepped out of bounds. The referees didn't review the play, so he scored a touchdown. If it wasn't for that, he hasn't done much of anything this year. And then Ben Tate of the Cleveland Browns is a player a lot of people had high expectations for. He got injured in week 1 against Pittsburgh, hasn't got back on the field yet, so he's another guy being unproductive due to being injured. That is going to wrap up our first segment. Once again, I am the NFL Exporter, and we are getting ready for Thursday night football, Washington Redskins and New York Giants. So don't touch that dial. We'll be back after this commercial break. This is Blaze1Radio. Welcome back to the Firehouse with the NFL Exporter live on Blaze1Radio. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the games coming up for week 4 around the NFL. The Green Bay Packers played the Chicago Bears. That game is in Chicago. Certainly a couple of injuries to note in this one. Now the Bears certainly have got hit hard early here. Star wide receiver Brandon Marshall has been battling a knee and ankle injury since week 1. He re-aggravated that injury last week in their Monday night football game in which the Bears won 27-19 at the Jets. He got hurt again in the third quarter, did not return to the ball game. He's a warrior, so I would expect him on the football field, but if he's not at 100%, that certainly could have an effect on the football game. Nonetheless, the Bears still have very talented weapons. You have the versatile running back Matt Forte. Jay Cutler, again, he hasn't been turning the football over lately. He certainly has helped Chicago Chicago play much more efficiently. You have Alshon Jeffrey, who's been able to get past his hamstring injury. Had his first 100-yard game of the season in the Bears win on Monday night. And the Bears offensive line is playing a lot better. Now, on the defensive side of the football, the Bears did lose their top defensive back, Charles Tillman, for the entire season. He suffered that injury in week 2 against San Francisco. Nonetheless, the players are stepping up big time for the Bears. I'm talking about their rookie defensive back, Corey Fuller from Virginia Tech. When I look at Green Bay, this is certainly a team I'm expecting to rebound to make up for their poor performance last week. They lost 19-7 at Detroit, and I'm really talking about their offense. This season, they really have had 2 below-average performances at Seattle in Week 1 and last week at Detroit. Aaron Rodgers only threw for 162 yards. His top 2 receivers, neither one of those guys had over 59 yards receiving, and it just was a poor showing. Eddie Lacy, we talked about him in our fantasy football section, underperforming. He had a fumble to give Detroit the lead early in the first quarter, and so I think this is a team that's going to be motivated. They understand that they cannot drop to 1-3. Also to note on the injury report for the Green Bay Packers is outside linebacker Clay Matthews could not go last week. He's struggling to get past a groin injury. We certainly want to keep an eye on that as well. But when it comes to this Packers team, and particularly that offense, I know they want to come out and make amends for that poor showing last week. I think the key to this game, though, is going to be, can Green Bay run the ball effectively? You know, right now, Aaron Rodgers doesn't have the weapons he used to have at the wide receiver and tight end position on offense. And so, that was being compensated for by a running game. And so they've also been hit with a couple injuries on their offensive line. I think that has kind of played into the situation as well. This is going to be a very close game. It's kind of hard to call this one because these teams are very evenly matched. Obviously, being in the same division, they know each other well. Nonetheless, we're going to take Green Bay finding a way to win this one on the road. Let's go with Green Bay 27, the Chicago Bears 24. Buffalo is traveling out to play the Houston Texans. This is a pretty intriguing matchup as well. Now, Arian Foster, the star running back for the Texans, was unable to play last week. They lost in New York 30-17. He had a hamstring injury as well. And so if he plays in the game or not, certainly is going to have an effect on this one. So this game, I really cannot put a score on due to that reason. And that reason alone, I certainly expect for the Texans defense to rebound. Them giving up 30 points is something that you're really not accustomed to seeing. This is an opportunity. We talked about C.J. Spiller not performing well. The Texans have given up 142 rushing yards a game in the first 3 games of the season. And so I think this one is going to be close nonetheless. You have a quarterback in Ryan Fitzpatrick for the Houston Texans who has not played well, and the Bills defense has certainly played at a very high level early this year. So again, this is a game I really can't call. I know it's going to be close. Obviously, turnovers are going to play a major part in this one. The Bills' second-year quarterback E.J. Manuel has yet to turn the football over this season, so that has definitely kept the Bills in a lot of games. Again, we have to wait to see if Arian Foster is going to play in this one. Tennessee Titans are traveling to play the Indianapolis Colts. I definitely like the Colts in this one. I think that Andrew Luck in that offense is really starting to click. He's playing at a very elite level. You look at this Tennessee Titans team and just not enough offensive firepower. We talked about them in the preseason when we did our power rankings. And I just don't see it. You have a quarterback in Jake Locker who's been very inconsistent. The running game has been inconsistent. Not the best wide receivers in the world. Certainly guys with a little bit of talent, but when you have a quarterback who's inaccurate, certainly kind of limits their potential. Now, Jake Locker, their starting quarterback for Tennessee, may not be able to play this week, and so especially if it's a backup, I think you like Indianapolis in this one, no matter which way that it goes. Now we have seen backup quarterbacks come in and do some good things. A lot of times maybe teams underestimate them, or these guys come in knowing they have nothing to lose, so they kind of just let it loose. But Indianapolis is definitely the better overall team. I think it's going to be close as well, because this could put the Tennessee Titans in danger of going 1-3. Nonetheless, we're going to take Indianapolis winning this one at home 27-17. Carolina Panthers are traveling to the Baltimore Ravens. This should be a pretty hard-hitting defensive battle. That's pretty much what you've seen out of these teams this year. Now, last week the Ravens won a close one, 23-21 on the road against the Cleveland Browns. They got a field goal from kicker Justin Tucker as time expired. You have the Carolina Panthers looking to rebound after an embarrassing loss at home last week to the Pittsburgh Steelers, 37-19. You want to talk about injuries. Man, this Carolina Panthers team has been hit hard early this season. Now, all three of their running backs are currently out. I don't know if running back D'Angelo Williams is going to be able to go this week, but last week he sat out the game with an injury. In their loss to the Steelers on Sunday night, they lost Jonathan Stewart, who was replacing Williams. He's going to be gone for a while with an MCL sprain. And then the other running back that they had, Mike Tolbert, suffered a hairline fracture in his leg. He's definitely out for Sunday. And so they've got to find somebody to run the football. I don't think that they're quite equipped to be a all-out passing team. Cam Newton has played well this season, but again, running the football is a formula that has worked for Carolina so well in the past. They have that stout defense, and they certainly want to control the clock and really try to give that defense an opportunity to dominate. Kind of a similar situation in Baltimore. I think Baltimore has a couple more weapons in the passing game, especially the addition of Steve Smith. He's come over from Carolina, led the team in receiving yards for 3 straight weeks, so I know that's a big positive. The Ravens got hit hard with an injury last week as well. Now, their starting running back, Bernard Pierce, was unable to go with a thigh injury. He's day-to-day. He should be playing this week. But tight end Dennis Pitta, definitely our heart and our blessings, our prayers, I should say, go out to him. Suffered a dislocated hip for the second straight year, and it's the same hip. And so his career very well may be over. I know he stayed in Cleveland after that loss last week to get some tests done. And so that's a big loss for the Ravens. He was a major part of that offense. Nonetheless, I think Baltimore's defense at home can certainly be dominant, especially with basically a no-name running back or a running back who's not 100% healthy for Carolina. But I do expect for this to be a defensive battle. We're going to take Baltimore winning this game at home. Let's go with Baltimore 24, Carolina 20. Detroit is playing the New York Jets. This should be a pretty good game here as well. I expect to see pretty much the same thing that I seen Monday night, unless defensive coordinator and head coach Rex Ryan decides to play his hand a little different. Now, the Jets right now have one of the worst secondaries in the NFL. Their starting defensive back, D. Milliner, has only played in 1 game this season. He's battling an injury. The rest of the guys have a lot of inexperience. And I didn't understand why Rex Ryan basically blitzed every single down last week against Chicago. I understand that you want to get to the quarterback, but at the same time, if you have a weak secondary and you are blitzing all those guys play after play after play, the offense made the adjustment. And the Bears simply went with some screens. They went with some quick hitters, got the ball out of Jay Cutler's hands quick, and really capitalized on that Jets defense. And so with Detroit coming in town this week, you got Matt Stafford, Calvin Johnson and company. They certainly match up well against this Jets secondary. And so, like I said, I think the Jets are going to have to figure out a way on defense to make amends for the players they have back there, because blitzing every down just won't get it done, especially if protection holds up. These guys aren't able to stay with any receivers or tight ends. Geno Smith has got to play a lot better. Talked about him in the preseason. He's gotten off to the same start that he did last year. Good Geno, bad Geno. 1 good game, 1 bad game. Well, he's basically played 2 bad games back to back. Now, I will say again on his defense, the wide receivers that he has at his disposal are not that good. So I can't place the total blame on him. I mean, if guys aren't getting open, then what can you do? The injury here we're concerned about is Eric Decker. He missed last week's game with the hamstring injury. He is the Jets' top wide receiver, and so if he's unable to go again, that's certainly going to make life more difficult. I think the Jets can have some type of success running the ball. Another major injury this game was the Detroit Lions starting linebacker Stephen Tulloch. Now check this out. Last week, after he had a sack on Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, when he got up to celebrate, part of his celebration, he jumped up in the air, and when he came down, he tore his ACL. And so he is out for the entire season. I know he feels really bad about that. I mean, how often do you see a player have an injury, especially of that magnitude, when it's not even during an actual football play? This guy is celebrating, and when he jumps up in the air, he comes down and tears his ACL. So that's a big loss for Detroit. Him and DeAndre Levy, the other starting linebacker for Detroit, certainly had that Lions linebacking core looking like one of the best units in the NFL. Nonetheless, I don't think the Jets want to drop to 1-3 at home. But looking at this matchup, you think that Detroit can certainly get a little bit of pressure on Geno Smith, and Detroit just got more talent. And so we're going to go with Detroit winning this one on the road. Let's go with Detroit 30, the New York Jets 21. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are playing at the Pittsburgh Steelers, and we certainly hope this is a different team than we seen last week here on Thursday Night Football, who got creamed 56-14 and actually were down 56-0 in that ball game. Again, the injury bug has really decimated the Buccaneers. Their starting running back, Doug Martin, is expected to be back this week after he missed the first 3 games. We spoke about him in the fantasy football segment. Vincent Jackson now has a little bit of an injury. You certainly wonder how much the losing has to do with that, but he's questionable for that game. Tampa Bay also lost their starting quarterback, Josh McCown, but not too much to worry about. He wasn't doing much of anything anyway. Their backup quarterback, Mike Glennon, was the starter last year, so it's not like they're throwing in a guy who's inexperienced. You have a quarterback coming in who's familiar with the system and the offense and the players. And then on the defensive side of the football, which is where Tampa Bay got hurt the most. We talked about that last week. Gerald McCoy, their top defensive tackle, is still going to be out. I don't know if linebacker Geno Hayes is going to be able to play. They're also without defensive back Mike Jenkins, who was gone for the season with a pectoral. You're looking at Pittsburgh, man, they got hit big time by injuries last week. That defense had been struggling in the first 2 games, giving up over 150 rushing yards per game. Players getting older. I've seen a lot of missed tackles. Just not the same vaunted Steelers defense that we're used to seeing. Nonetheless, they finally put a good game together at Carolina, but they end up losing 3 players for a very long time, starting with defensive back Ike Taylor. He's got a broken forearm. He said he hopes to return sometime before the season is over. They lost starting linebacker rookie Ryan Shazier, who was playing extremely well. They drafted him out of Ohio State. He has a sprained MCL. He's going to be gone maybe about 3 to 6 weeks. And then you have outside linebacker Jarvis Jones, who suffered an injury to his wrist. He's got to have surgery. He's out indefinitely. And so, I still like the Steelers winning this game. Their offense has been playing well. Their weapons, Antonio Brown at wide receiver, running back Le'Veon Bell, Ben Roethlisberger has been playing efficient. I like them putting up the points over Tampa Bay, but with all of the injuries to that Steelers defense, this is a game that could be a lot closer. I would have to think that Tampa Bay is going to play a little better this week. They're one of the only 1 out of 2 teams who have not won a single game this season, and so you certainly are expecting a better effort. Nonetheless, we like Pittsburgh winning this one at home. It's going to be a little closer than anticipated. Let's go with Pittsburgh 27, Tampa Bay 20. Let's go ahead and take a quick commercial break. When we return, we'll go ahead and finish previewing our games for Week 4 around the NFL. Once again, it's the NFL Exporter on Blaze1Radio. You are burning it down with the Firehouse. Welcome back to the Firehouse live on Blaze1Radio. I'm the NFL Exporter, and let's go ahead and hop back into our previews for Week 4 around the NFL. We have the Miami Dolphins traveling out to play the Oakland Raiders. And this one, you had the Raiders looking for their first win of the season. They're another team who has yet to win the game, like Tampa Bay as well as Jacksonville. for this Raiders team, the struggles continue. You know, this franchise has not been able to put together a winning season since early in the 2000s. They do expect running back Maurice Jones-Drew to play in this one. He's missed the last couple games with a hand injury. Possibly could give the Raiders running game a lift. They've struggled the last 2 games to run the ball effectively. We do know last week that the Kansas City Chiefs were able to get over 170 rushing yards against this Dolphins defense, and so that bodes well. Rookie quarterback Derek Carr has not played that bad. Just doesn't have top-tier weapons in the passing game. When you look at the Raiders defense, certainly a lot of veterans. You know, they brought over Justin Tuck, Lamar Woodley, brought over Terrell Brown, Carlos Rogers at defensive back from the 49ers. You have a veteran back there in Charles Woodson at safety with Tyvon Branch. So they certainly have some good players. You know, they drafted Khalil Mack, who was one of the top defensive stars coming out of college this year. And so, they played tough. Last week, they limited the New England Patriots to just 16 points in New England. So that was impressive. And so I certainly expect for this Oakland Raiders team to be very amped up for this football game. You know, that crowd is still crazy out there. You had the Dolphins traveling across the country for a game. And so, and that usually doesn't bode well for that team making that travel. I would say the Raiders in this one, but let me tell you, the Dolphins should be playing with a sense of urgency this week. They're in danger of falling to 1-3. They were embarrassed last week at home against the Kansas City Chiefs. They lost 34-15. And after that game, quarterback Ryan Tannehill became under the microscope for his poor and inconsistent quarterback play. It wasn't until basically yesterday that the Dolphins named him the starter for this week. And so you have to think with his job on the line, he's going to come out and play well. If his teammates have his back, they're going to protect him on the offensive line, and receivers are going to work extra hard to get open. That running game should be able to have a little success. You have Lamar Miller, but again, last week, the Raiders held the Patriots to just 76 running yards on 32 attempts. And so, that's something there that we have to watch out for. As far as the Dolphins defense, they've been a unit who've played pretty well, been able to get pressure on the quarterback, but they've been struggling ever since they lost their top linebacker, Donnell Ellerbe. He went down the first week of the season with season-ending surgery. Their other starting linebackers are trying to get back to 100% healthy. It's just really been a lot of pressure on them. Without that offense being able to sustain drives and stay on the football field, they've been on the football field a little too much. And so when I'm looking at this game, I'm thinking it's going to be very close. Could end up being a defensive struggle, maybe not a lot of points put up. This is a tough one to call. I'm going to go out on the ledge, and you know what? I'm going to choose the Dolphins in this one. It could go either way, but I'm just going to say they have the better team, and I think that those players are going to play with a sense of urgency considering the turmoil that's going on in that locker room. Let's take Miami in this one, 20-17. We got Jacksonville traveling to San Diego. The big news in this one is that the Jaguars are going to be starting their rookie quarterback. Blake Bortles was taken number 3 overall in this year's draft. They did sit him out to start the season, even though he played better than the quarterback who was starter in Chad Henne. Didn't want to just throw him into the fire, but the writing's on the wall. After getting blown out in 3 straight games, there's no need to hold this guy back any longer. Let him get out there and play. And I think the Jacksonville Jaguars actually had the best opportunity to win with him at quarterback. And so I'm very excited to see him play. I'm quite sure Jaguars fans are as well. This guy has a strong arm, a lot of zip on the ball. Again, Jacksonville just doesn't have a running game right now. So when you're a team that's one-dimensional, it makes it very easy for defenses to scheme and game plan against you. Be interesting to see if Toby Gerhardt has any luck. We already told you when we talked about him in the preseason fantasy football. By the time we did our rankings coming in the draft time, he wasn't even on the top board being ranked anymore as a running back. When you look at the San Diego Chargers team, they're playing very confident right now. They've been getting hit by the injury bug as of late. They had already came into last week's game against Buffalo, in which they won 22-10 without starting center Nick Hardwick, who had a neck injury. They had to place yet again Melvin Ingram, outside linebacker, on the injured reserve list, set to return later in the season. Last week didn't get any better. They end up losing their top receiving running back, Danny Woodhead, with a broken fibula. He's gone for the year. In the week before against Seattle, they lost their starting running back, Ryan Matthews, to a sprained MCL. He's slated to be out another 4 weeks or so. And so, nonetheless, Phillip Rivers and that offense continues to move forward. Rivers is playing some very good football right now. He's just seeing the field clearly. I really like the weapons they have around him. The one guy we're waiting for to break out is Keenan Allen. We talked about him in our fantasy football section. He is trying to get past a hamstring injury, but this is another matchup. We thought we'd see it last week in Buffalo. This is a favorable matchup. I think if this guy is going to break out, this would be the game to do so. When you look at San Diego's defense, very underrated because there's not a bunch of names. Another injury to note on this one, their inside linebacker, Manti Te'o, injured his foot. He's not going to play in this one. He's listed as week to week. Nonetheless, not a lot of big name guys that you know, like defensive tackles, Kendall Reyes, defensive end, Corey Legent, safety Eric Weddle, guys that you just don't know about, but this defense is playing very well right now. They're really stopping the run and doing what they need to do in order to keep their offense on the football field to put up points. And so I think Jacksonville will play better. Certainly will be inspired by their rookie quarterback, but at the end of the day, San Diego is the better team. They're at home. We're going to take the Chargers winning this one 34-20. Atlanta is traveling to Minnesota. In this game, you're figuring that passing is going to be the recipe, and with that being the case, it's in the dome, so it's going to be like a home game for Atlanta. You got to like the Falcons in this one. You look at this Minnesota Vikings team, and I think they'll play a little bit better. Again, they're going to have a rookie quarterback starting for the first time this year. Teddy Bridgewater was their draft pick in the first round this year. Matt Castle, their starting quarterback, left last week's game with broken bones in his foot, and so he's not going to be returning for the season. And so now it's on Bridgewater to take this team over. Now they got hit with another injury, and they've really just been a bad year for Minnesota. They're already without their star running back Adrian Peterson. Their starting quarterback goes down. Their top slot receiver Jerome Simpson, he's suspended indefinitely for off the field issues. Now your top tight end Kyle Rudolph is going to miss about 6 weeks with a growing injury, and so they're really down to just two for sure weapons over there in Minnesota with Cordero Patterson and Greg Jennings. Just a lot of pressure on a rookie quarterback to perform. Nonetheless, that's what this guy gets paid for. We'll see what he has to offer. As I mentioned, for Minnesota's defense, you expect this team to play good at home. I mean, last week they were able to hold Drew Brees in that high-flying offense to just 20 points. And so they got some guys who can get after the quarterback. You know that their new head coach, Mike Zimmerman, was the defensive coordinator over at Cincinnati. And so you expect them to be tough, but at the end of the day, that young secondary just won't be able to handle Matt Ryan and that offense. I expect for Julio Jones to continue to have big games and put up big numbers. You don't have a player in their secondary who can stop him. Do have to see if Roddy White is going to be back on the football field. He had a hamstring injury, was unable to go last Thursday night. I don't expect for Atlanta to run the ball particularly effective, but again, I think Matt Ryan and that offense, along with Julio Jones, is just clicking on all cylinders right now. And with all the injuries to Minnesota, I would say if Minnesota was fully healthy, this was a game that they were set up to win. But that's not the case. We're going to take Atlanta winning this one on the road, 27-20. Philadelphia is playing at San Francisco. This is a game that Philadelphia on paper is set up to win. However, injuries are haunting them as well. They're already without two of their top linemen. They lost Pro Bowler Evan Mathis. He's going to be back later in the season. He's currently on that IR, set to return later in the season list. When they were out without their top tackle, or I should say their starting tackle, Lane Johnson, his backup went out for the year. And then last week they lost their starting center, Jason Kels. He's got to have sports hernia surgery. He's going to be gone about 4 to 8 weeks. And so I think it's really we need to watch to see if Philadelphia's offensive line is going to be able to continue to be effective, opening up holes in the running game. Most importantly, can they protect Nick Foles? I know that Chip Kelly is aware of that, so he'll put some plays in place to get the ball out of Foles' hands quickly. Nonetheless, I like San Francisco in this one for a couple reasons. I think that they don't want to drop to 1-3. They understand that they're in a division that is very tough. I think that somehow, some way, the message should have got through to this team that they need to get back to running the football. They kind of lost their touch these past couple weeks, getting pass happy. Their true identity is pounding the football. That is how Colin Kaepernick initially had success in this league, was off of play action in the threat of their running game. The 49ers offense also is not good at pass protection. They're excellent, though, at run blocking. So I think if you factor in that, along with the injuries to the Eagles' offensive line, maybe the sense of urgency for San Francisco. But I will tell you this much as I like the Niners in this game, also because Philadelphia doesn't play much defense. If the 49ers cannot get pressure on Nick Foles, he will shred this secondary apart. With last week, the 49ers let a second-string quarterback hit him up for 244 and 2 touchdowns. They didn't get any sacks on this guy. If they give that type of time to Nick Foles, he's going to pick this secondary apart. And so I like San Francisco just based on merit and pride in this one. But this one could go Philadelphia's way. We're going to go with San Francisco 27, Philadelphia 24. New Orleans is traveling to Dallas for Sunday Night Football. This is going to be a close football game, but looking at this Dallas Cowboys defense, I don't see them being able to stop Drew Brees. This has a shootout written on it. Look, last week, Dallas's defense gave up 342 yards and 3 TDs to a third-string running back. Yeah, I know it's the NFL, it's week to week, but, I mean, come on now. You can't do that. And you got Drew Brees in this offense coming to town. It doesn't look good for Dallas. Now, I will say that New Orleans defense hasn't played that well either. But I think that the Saints just have too much firepower that Dallas is not going to be able to keep up. Somehow, some way, they're good for a turnover or two. I like DeMarco Murray running the football, but I'm not sure. I know that Tony Romo missed practice yesterday. His back kind of cramped up on him again, and so we got to watch that. But we're going to go with New Orleans winning this one. Let's go with New Orleans 37, Dallas 31. And on Monday Night Football, we got New England traveling out to Kansas City. It's going to be a much better game than anticipated. New England's offense has not found its rhythm yet. They've struggled to run the football consistently. Their defense has played good enough to limit their opponents to field goals. When I look at Kansas City, this one is all about what they're going to do. I know their defense is going to show up. They certainly had the ability to get after Tom Brady and make him uncomfortable in the pocket. But that offense can Niles Davis, the backup for Kansas City, continue to run the ball effectively. Will Jamal Charles be back in this one? He's day-to-day. He should be returning soon. And Alex Smith, he's been the guy who's dictated games. In the first game of the season, 3 interceptions. They lost by 16. Week 2 at Denver, no interceptions. They end up losing by 7. Last week, 3 touchdowns, only 186 yards passing, but no interceptions. They win that ball game, and so quarterback play is going to be really something we keep an eye on. In this one, nonetheless, we're going to take New England winning on the road. Let's go with New England 27, Kansas City 17. Once again, you are burning it down with the Firehouse on Blaze1Radio. Are getting ready for the big Thursday night football game with the Washington Redskins hosting the New York Giants. You know how we do each and every Thursday, get you ready for the game by giving you in-depth analysis and breakdowns and seeing who's going to win the football game. Tonight we have a special guest on the show, Mr. Victor Gardner. He is a radio show host and personality for the Fantasy Sports Network over on Blog Talk Radio. He is going to chime in tonight. He's also going to be joining us randomly throughout the season. He's a football guy, has a lot of great expertise and knowledge, and so he's going to help us get through the segment here. Quite sure that'll be much appreciated. And so let's go ahead and look into the X's and O's and see how this one is going to go. For the Washington Redskins, we're going to start at the quarterback position. You know that Kirk Cousins has stepped in for RG3 while he is injured. So why don't you tell us, Victor, what can we expect to see from Kirk Cousins in the Redskins offense in the passing game tonight from the quarterback position?
I'll tell you what, Lance. Kirk Cousins is a steady quarterback. What I mean by that is he has limited athletic ability, but he's athletic. But he uses his brain. He sits in the pocket and he buys time. Against the secondary that he's going up against in New York, it's going to be very easy for him to pick him apart. Now, last season, he had one of the worst passer ratings against New York, 31.8, I believe. They also have been a driving downpour. I don't think that's going to happen tonight in New York, but you never know. Here's the deal. He throws to different receivers. I love RG3, but Kirk Cousins doesn't stick with just the one or two guys. He spreads the ball out. And I think that's going to make him a dangerous adversary for that New York Giant defense.
Definitely. And for the New York Giants, Eli Manning and that offense, look, I'm not going to allow one game to kind of deter me from what I've seen with this offense. Now, obviously, as the season continues to move forward, you figure that he's going to have a better grasp on that passing game. I also know next week they're expecting their rookie number 1 draft pick, Odell Beckham Jr., to return to the lineup, so that should help their passing game some. You know that every team in the NFL is going to have to win at some point, so I certainly chalk that up to their win last week at home. Their backs were against the wall, did not want to go 0-3. Were able to get some turnovers from Ryan Fitzpatrick of the Houston Texans. But tonight from Eli Manning, I would expect a decent ball game. Now, the Washington Redskins defense, I must say, has played pretty well this year. But I think that Eli Manning will be able to have some success in the passing game. It's all going to be set up by the run. But I think that Eli can be effective tonight. I think he's going to face some pressure. But I think looking at the Redskins secondary right now, there's certainly some holes. And so I think this is a game where Eli Manning probably will end up passing anywhere from 200 to 280 yards, maybe 2 TDs, an interception. Again, it just really depends on how the flow of the game is going to go. Now, when we take a look at the running back position for the Washington Redskins, certainly has some talented players over there with Alfred Morris as well as Roy Halou. What can we expect to see from the Redskins running game tonight, Victor?
I'll tell you, Lance, that the defense of New York is not that forgiving to the running back, just like the Redskins defense. But Alfred Morris has seen 20-plus carries in 2 straight games. That hasn't been done since last season midway. I believe he will be fed the ball so that Kirk Cousins can be more effective in the passing game with the play action. A guy that I think is going to score again, and it'll be, 4 straight games, or 3 straight games will be Mr. Young. I truly believe that Jake Gruden wants to get the fullback the ball. Kirk Cousins throws the ball to the fullback. He might vulture a touchdown or 2 from Alfred Morris, and maybe Roy Halou as well. The thing is, they're going to pound that rock. And they're going to pound it so much to that defensive front of the Giants, they might cave in come midway second, early third. That soon. I believe the game is happening in FedEx Field, so I'm going to be expecting a raucous crowd. So when you look at Alfred Morris with the crowd behind him, he's already a shifty, good guy that doesn't evade contact. He looks for a little bit of contact. If he doesn't find it, he'll run up the sideline or up the middle, where it may be. But his ability to take that pounding and deliver a pounding is going to be very, very instrumental in this, I believe, victory for the Washington Redskins.
Definitely, I'll feel you on that. And for the New York Giants, they certainly have one of the best offseason pickups, at least thus far. bringing in Rashard Jennings last week. I had 176 rush yards on 32 carries, scored a touchdown. Now, I'm not sure if it was because of this reason, because Jennings certainly has been the only player that, we talk fantasy football on the show. He's been the only Giant that we suggested that you touch this year. But last week, he dedicated that game to his father, who had both of his legs amputated. He said that since his father didn't have legs, he did, and he wanted to use them. So he came out, was very inspired. Nonetheless, he's a very talented player, is a perfect fit for the system, is a versatile running back, can not only run the football, but can catch it out of the backfield, which makes him extremely dangerous. And so I like the Redskins. The Giants are certainly going to look to establish the run because they have a new offensive scheme in place there, a new offensive coordinator, and some unproven wide receivers with the exception of Victor Cruz. Getting Jennings involved early and often seems to be a formula and recipe that New York is going to want to use, and especially after a big game like he had last week. I know that they're going to want to get the running game going. Between him and Alfred Morris, whoever runs the ball more effectively certainly could have a big imprint on this game. And unlike Morris, Jennings definitely gets all of the goal line carries. Let's take it over to the wide receivers. Now, I'm not sure if Deshaun Jackson is going to go in this one. He was questionable. He did play last week at Philadelphia, but again, he wasn't going to miss that game against his former team to save his life. Nonetheless, the Redskins have some pretty talented wide receivers and a good tight end. Tell us about the wide receivers for the Washington Redskins and what type of damage they could potentially do against a pretty tough Giants secondary.
Lance, I'll predicate it by saying Deshaun Jackson is going to play. Even if it's just to be a decoy. He made it through the pain of last Sunday's game, so be assured of that. And he's been a Giant killer. Now, the difference is Pierre Garçon also will require some touches. And with that being the case, the Giants don't have a secondary that can match it against those two, plus Andre Roberts. Roberts has proven to be a very steady number 3 wide receiver and a positive in the kick return game. He's getting a lot of the dirty yards or dirty catches and not a lot of accolades for it. I don't know if you want me to go to tight ends or not, but when you look at the complete passing game for the Washington Redskins, if Deshaun doesn't hurt you, Pierre can hurt you. If Pierre doesn't hurt you, then Reed, I don't want to keep saying Reed, Andre Roberts will hurt you. And then you have Niles Paul, former wide receiver, current tight end. So the arsenal that Kirk Cousins has to throw to, not to mention, as I said before, Darrell Young gets in the passing game as well. So does Roy Halou. So the receiving corps for the Washington Redskins is very stout versus Prince Amukamara and Samar Roll. I can't even tell you who the other DBs are for the Giants, but they don't have 4 or 5 DBs that can cover the Redskins wide receivers. It's incumbent upon Kirk Cousins to get the ball to the correct player.
Certainly. Now for the New York Giants, I would certainly say that their wide receivers are not as talented as the Redskins. You do have Victor Cruz, who is their main target. Was able to get his first 100-yard game of the season last week playing against the Texans. But again, that was a game where Houston turned the ball over 3 times. And so that certainly gave the Giants extra possessions and opportunities to do things. And Cruz had one 50-yard catch, which really ate up the bulk of his yardage. Nonetheless, he's going to continue to be the main target for the Redskins. And they're without D'Angelo Hall. We'll talk about that when we get to the defense defense for the Redskins, but I certainly think that Cruz is going to be the number one guy they're looking to stop, especially with him, having a game that was noteworthy last week. Do they have someone to stop him? That remains to be seen. I think the Giants are understanding that they can't just have Cruz playing on the outside all the time. They still have to let him work the slot, which is where he's made a name for himself in this league. When you look at the other wide receivers, you do have Ruben Randall, a guy who's not going to give you a ton of production, but had a good game against Washington last year. Certainly will be the next player that Eli Manning is looking for if Victor Cruz is covered. You also have Jernigan in his second year, a guy who's really trying to come around. I think the guy to watch is tight end Larry Donald. He's been pretty effective this year, taking over the starting position for the Giants at tight end. We know Eli Manning is a tight end friendly quarterback, so that's certainly a matchup that is going to be worth watching.
Jumping on what you just said, Lance, it's very interesting. You mentioned Ruben Randall has had success versus the Redskins. So has Victor Cruz. Unfortunately, for the Redskins, they lost D'Angelo Hall, their best cornerback. So I think what you're saying is very valid in the fact that the receivers have an opportunity to do well versus the Redskins' defense. Last week, Keenan Robinson was a little bit exposed covering the tight end. So when you're bringing up the tight end for New York, that's a strong possibility that he might be flexed out against the Redskins linebackers, and it'll tell you if it's zone or if it's man, and you'll see how dangerous they can be. I'm not saying that Eli can have a gigantic game versus the Redskins defense, but this is a game where his offensive weapons at receiver can be a little bit healthy because the Redskins have had some issues at corner. But Brandon Merriweather and Ryan Clark are very dangerous back there. It's just the corners that might give the Skins defense a little bit of issue going against the Giants wide receivers.
Yep, I have to totally agree with you there. And speaking of that, let's go ahead and flip it to the defensive side of the football. For the Redskins, not a lot of notable names in that front four for the defensive line. Did bring over a nice free agent pickup in Jason Hatcher. He's been playing pretty well. Barry Cofield, I know, was banged up. I don't know if he's back in the lineup. But why don't you tell me what type of pressure you think their front four can get on Eli Manning and how you're expecting them to do in the trenches, trying to stop what's going to be a heavy dose of Rashard Jennings?
I'll start off by saying this. It's going to be the front three because they play a 3-4. But the Redskins are the number one run defense in the NFL. Number one. It goes, and Hatcher is a big reason for it. But also, the young man that got kicked out of Sunday's game, Mr. Baker, is plugging up holes and putting pressure on the quarterbacks, which frees up Hatcher. Hatcher lines up over the nose sometimes as well. The guy that's been benefiting the most out of this happens to be Ryan Kerrigan. Kerrigan is quickly becoming that number one outside linebacker and making the one-year contract that Brian Orakpo got seem a little bit, hey, it's worth it. He's not going to get a lot of money because he's not making that much noise. Granted, it's the first part of the season. This will be game 4. But if you want to talk about the front 4, you would have to go with the front 5 because Baker, Hatcher, and the other defensive end happen to be very productive at putting pressure up the middle, freeing up the linebackers. But Ryan Kerrigan, I have a friend that calls major trouble for Eli Manning in the passing game. I don't think Rashard Jennings is going to get that many rushing yards versus this run defense.
Yeah, and that's a very valid point. I know last week they held LaShawn McCoy to just 22 rush yards on 19 carries. Forget about the carries. When is the last time any team has held Shady McCoy to less than 70 rushing yards in the game, let alone 30? And so that's something that we want to watch out for. A very underrated Washington Redskins defensive line. As for the Giants, we're certainly looking to see if Jason Pierre-Paul is back in the form. It wasn't too long ago, a couple years ago, when the Giants won their last Super Bowl in 2012. that Pierre-Paul was highly regarded as one of the best defensive ends in the football league. Many seen him as the premier pass rusher and kind of a hybrid player. Definitely got a lot of balls knocked down, always seemed to get interceptions off of tip balls. Just was a playmaker, but obviously with Justin Tuck and Osi Umenyiora not being there anymore, along with some injuries he's battled, his play has dropped off. And so I've been watching to see if he can get back to an elite level. Haven't had a chance to see a Giants game this year, really hadn't wanted to, but I'll certainly be taking a good look at him tonight. He's certainly the one player on that defensive line who could possibly disrupt the passing game. Without question, though, the Giants are going to have to be very tough in the trenches because Alfred Morris is one of the best running backs in the NFL. Taking a look at those linebackers, Victor, you were just speaking on Ryan Kerrigan. You mentioned Brian Orakpo. Why don't you tell me what we can expect from the linebackers from the Washington Redskins tonight, not only stopping the run, but having to maybe drop back in coverage against linebackers and protect the flats against a West Coast offense in the Giants that definitely has a short passing game.
The thing about this, Lance, is Brian Kerrigan and Orakpo put pressure on the outside. Terry Riley Jr. and Keenan Robinson are your run stuffers. Now, they flex, the Redskins, they flex Keenan Robinson out to cover because he's the better cover linebacker. Zach Ertz ran by him a few times Sunday, and Ryan Clark had to come over the top a little bit to help him out. But that's the matchup I'm looking at, especially, as you said, Eli is a tight end from the quarterback. I looked at the stats, and I believe the tight end for the Giants has 22 receptions or something like that. Not that many yards, but he has a lot of the targets and a lot of catches. That tells me it's going to be a busy day for Keenan Robinson. And for those fantasy folks and IDP folks such as myself, that's a pretty good matchup because I know the ball's going to go my defensive player's way. So he'll have opportunities to get pass defenses, tackles, and interceptions, as well as lining up in the middle and stopping the run. So when I look at the Redskins' linebacking core, that conceivably is the strongest part of their defense. Again, as I said before, the front three, they're pretty good because they're making room for the linebackers to get in on the quarterback. I think it's going to be a rough night for Eli Manning as a passer and not so nice for Rashad James as a runner. These linebackers can cover, they can hit, they can intercept the ball, and they're very, very, very talented all around. Each one of them provides an asset to create one cohesive linebacking core. And again, as I said, I think they are the strongest part of the defense.
Yeah, definitely. I feel you on that. And I'm happy you brought up those middle linebackers because I was unsure. The Redskins had to play for the first time this year without their defensive leader, their defensive captain, really a guy who was the heart and soul of that team overall, London Fletcher. And so, those guys have definitely came in and filled the role. And again, like you mentioned, I was kind of shocked that the Redskins were amongst the league leaders right now in stopping the run. On the flip side of the coin for the Giants, not the same thing. Now, look, their starting linebacker, John Beeson, is doubtful for this one with a foot injury. Outside of him, a lot of young and unproven players. You do still have Chase Blackburn. He's really a guy who's good at covering tight ends as opposed to stopping the run. And look, last week, even though it was in limited carries, Alfred Blue, the backup running back for Houston, they played last week without their star running back, Arian Foster. He had 13 carries for 78 yards. And so I think this is a game here where Alfred Morris in that running game is going to have an opportunity to really gash this defense, who again last week, if it wasn't for the 3 turnovers by Houston's quarterback, Ryan Fitzpatrick, I certainly think that his yardage for Blue would have been much more, and Alfred Morris is a much better running back. And so the Giants have their work cut out for them tonight at linebacker. Even if Beeson is playing, he's not going to be 100%. Could come out at any time. And so the Giants definitely, this is a weakness of their team right now, is stopping the run. And Alfred Morris is not the running back you want to see if your defense struggles stopping the run. Now, you talked about D'Angelo Hall being out for the Redskins, tore his Achilles. You know that anytime you hear an Achilles injury, that's a wrap for a year. And so this is a secondary that was not quite playing that well. You know, the first week at Houston, they did a good job. I think their front seven, you know, has really held things in check. You kind of seen them get exposed last week against an offense who had an ability to pass with Nick Foles and the Eagles. Nonetheless, this is an opportunity tonight. I think that obviously if you had a team like Peyton Manning in Denver or one of the more higher scoring offenses come in, would have been a little more of a problem. But with a dumbed down West Coast offense, because as I mentioned, even the 50-yard reception by Victor Cruz last week, it was a short dump that he turned upfield to gain that yardage. I think it bodes well to give the Redskins a little opportunity to transition to playing without Hall. What can we expect to see, though? They're without their top defensive back. You mentioned Brandon Merriweather and Ryan Clark. In my opinion, both of those guys are hard hitters. Coverage, not necessarily the thing that they're best at. What can we expect from this Redskins secondary tonight?
You said exactly what I was going to say. A lot of hard hitting. If this West Coast offense is going to work for the Giants, they're going to have to do these dump offs. They're going to have to do the short passes and let Victor Cruz and all those other guys make something happen. The problem is, these guys are heat-seeking missiles. From Ryan Clark, Brandon Merriweather, Atari Bigby, Bakari Rambo, and the other young men that they got in the draft a few years ago. They're not the best, but they're getting very good at coverage. The thing is, number 24, he can be lulled to sleep by looking in the backfield and the receiving get behind him. That's the problem we saw when they played Houston. He was looking at all the action that was going on in that one play that Patrick threw to DeAndre Hopkins. He could have either made a tackle or he could have picked it off, but he was too busy looking in the backfield. Same person with Mercedes Lewis when they played Jacksonville. He went for the ball instead of hitting the man and forcing him out. And we saw Mercedes Lewis, a big tight end, rumble down the sideline for a touchdown. So that's the only concern I really have for the Washington Redskins secondary on that front. Again, if they're going to go the ball short, the receivers for the Giants are going to pay. But if they just double moves, pick bubble screens, and try to go over the top, just like Philly did with Macklin and Matthews, then you might see some production. I don't know if that's in the Giants' playbook, but that's the one weakness that I see in the secondary of the Washington Redskins. They fight on first action, and then some of the corners stare in the backfield way too long. So, hopefully Eli doesn't get a chance to do that. And the Redskins secondary picks them off because he's prone to throw several interceptions. And these guys might drop the ball after getting hit a few times. But I see that happening with the Skins secondary.
Sure. Talking about the Giants, their secondary was actually the strength of their team coming into the season. They went out and got a couple of nice free agent pickups, two players who played in the Super Bowl last year. They brought over Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie from the Denver Broncos. Also brought over Walter Thurman, who was in that Legion of Boom secondary for Seattle. They added him to Prince Amukamara, who was in his fourth year from Nebraska. And then you have Antrell Roll, who's definitely a Pro Bowl caliber safety. Unfortunately, Amukamara is questionable for this game. He's been battling injuries pretty much since he's entered the NFL. He's an undersized guy. Nonetheless, I don't see him really having much success against a Deshaun Jackson or a more physical Pierre Garçon. And then they lost Walter Thurman for the entire season. He tore his pectoral, and so now you're looking at a secondary that's just got two players, and without a pass rush, we've seen Kirk Cousins sit in the pocket and deliver a lot of accurate footballs. I mean, I got to give it to Cousins last week. Some of those passes he completed there was only one place that ball could be delivered, and he put it there. And so I think that the Giants are going to have to find some creative ways to get to Cousins, because they cannot let him sit back in the pocket. He'll definitely pick this particular secondary apart. Now let's look at the keys to the game. Victor, why don't you tell us what the keys for the Redskins are to winning this football game, and what are some of the key matchups you think that could play into the Redskins having a win tonight?
Sure. There's one thing we didn't mention, and that's special teams.
Yes.
The two losses the Redskins have had, there's been a special teams flub, a block kick of some sort, and a touchdown off of that special teams mistake. They had a kick return against Philadelphia Sunday. If the Giants can find a way to have some type of special teams miscue for the Washington Redskins, for whatever reason, Redskins can't rebound from that. However, if you want to go to one-on-one matchups, I'm going to say Victor Cruz, who I believe is a number 2 wide receiver, versus the secondary of the Washington Redskins. Secondarily, I will say Keenan Robinson and the tight end for the New York Giants. I think those two matchups will be key for the success of either team. You shut Victor Cruz down, their passing game to the receivers is done, other than Ruben Randall for short yardage. If Keenan Robinson can stay with the tight end, he's going to effectively shut down Eli's favorite target. That leaves the running game. And the Redskins are tops in the NFL against the run. You might even see a shutout by the Washington Redskins if these two things come to bear. That's my bold prediction, that if those two things come to bear, the Redskins will shut out the New York Football Giants.
Yeah, and as for the Giants, the keys to winning this one, definitely continuing to run the ball effectively. I know this is a tough challenge, as we discussed, but Rashard Jennings should be playing very confident. That offensive line should be very confident. This Giants team is not set up to pass the football a ton or become one-dimensional, because we have seen the Redskins been able to get after the quarterback quite a bit with Rakpo and Ryan Kerrigan coming off of those edges. And so running the football effectively, obviously for this Giants team's limiting turnovers. That's been a big problem, especially for Eli Manning, who led the NFL in interceptions last year. So those are the keys on offense. I think if they're able to run effectively, they can set up play action, and obviously not turning the football over, especially on the road, always bodes well for a team. On the defensive side of the football, they've got to stop the run. I know it's going to be a huge challenge, but they cannot afford to let Alfred Morris pick up huge chunks of yardage on the ground. And in playing against the pass, they're just going to have to stay sound and fundamental. Again, the Redskins have a lot of good weapons in the passing game, and so they've got to get pressure on Kirk Cousins, at least enough to make him uncomfortable, and they've got to mix up their coverages, because, again, this Redskins receiving core is definitely a handful. Victor, why don't you tell me who you think is going to win this game?
If it hasn't been evident by my analysis, I'll tell you again. The Washington Redskins should walk away victorious in this matchup. They have no choice. You don't want to go 1-3. That's where New York is going to be at the end of this matchup tonight. And, Jerry, one of our friends, mentioned that the Giants would be 0-7 heading into their bye week. They might be 1-6 heading into the bye week in a couple of weeks, in my opinion.
I'm with you. I like Washington winning this game. I think it's going to be competitive, but at some point, I think we've been able to identify more holes and more issues for the Giants than the Redskins. It could go either way, though. Again, this is a secondary that could be taken advantage of for Washington, but I think the type of offense the Giants run doesn't present as much of a matchup problems as maybe some other teams could present. And so I'm going to take the Redskins winning this one at home. I see more offense than defense. Let's go with Washington. It's a Thursday night game, so these games could be a little sluggish on a short week. Nonetheless, I'm going to take the Redskins 30, the Giants 20. All right, we've got you all set. everything that you need to know. Once again, before we get out of here, let's make sure you know where to connect with us on our social networks. Myself, the NFL Exporter, find me on Facebook or Twitter at NFL Exporter. That's spelled NFLExporter. To hear past editions of the Firehouse, go to youtube.com. In the search engine, put the Firehouse on Blaze1Radio with the NFL Exporter. To connect with Blaze1Radio on Twitter, it's Blaze1 Media. That's Blaze, the number 1 Media. On Facebook, it's Blaze1 Media. You'll see the big homie Gordon Mills' name attached to it. I'd like to thank my special guest, Victor Gardner, host and personality on the Fantasy Sports Network over on Blog Talk Radio, for joining us this evening. He'll be checking back in with us randomly. And again, the call-in number is 716-249-0552. Hit us up using the email. That's NFLExporter@yahoo.com. Everybody, enjoy the big game tonight. Have a safe weekend, and make sure to join us right here next week, 7 o'clock p.m., for another edition of the Firehouse. I'm the NFL Exporter, signing off, 1100.